Welcome to episode 93 of Scouting Hot Finds Radio. This is Jason Spangler, the Santee Swapper, your host. Today my interview is with Bill Mulrenin. Many of you will know him as the New York State OA Trader. Bill has had a great blog site up on the web for seems like decades now, going all the way back to the early 2000s. And his website is a great example of what I think some other people could copy and run with. I know I have actually tried to copy it as well myself. This idea of a centered blog site for a niche, in his case, New York State OA. If you've ever visited his website, you'll know what I'm talking about. In today's interview, we get into a lot of topics. We kind of go back in history to what the web looked like for the hobby back in those days, and then also kind of catch up with him and hear about his plans for updating the blog. So I hope you'll stay around and listen to this interview. It's a great one with Bill Mulrenin.
This is Jason Spangler, the Santee Swapper with Scouting Hot Finds Radio. My guest today is Bill Mulrenin. Now, some of you may have already seen Bill on our Scouting Hot Finds Insiders Roundtable that was recently recorded. But really, I wanted to get Bill on this podcast because for a long time, Bill has had one of the most unique websites in the hobby. It's an ambitious, years-long project to tell the story of New York State OA. Bill, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Glad to be on, Jason.
So, Bill, let's just go right to that blog that you have. Can you tell us about the beginning of this site? Where did you draw any inspiration, and kind of what was your original plan? When did it get started?
Yeah, I actually looked back at some stats. My first post was late January in 2004. At the time, I guess I was reading various blogs in different categories, although there wasn't a lot of scouting blogs out there. And I was also the New York State Blue Book editor when the Blue Book was coming out every couple of years, and it seemed to me there was like a gap of information between those editions, that there were new items coming out and discoveries being made of items that hadn't been in the previous editions. And I thought this would be a good opportunity, to keep me honest, to keep me finding out about these new issues and, letting the collecting community, making them aware of new items as they came out. And probably somewhat a little bit selfish. I figured if I was posting this information, I might come up with a trade or two out of it and, people would hopefully start feeding me some information that I might otherwise have overlooked. I'd have to go back and look, but probably there were, 25 to 30 OA lodges in New York State then. So it's a pretty big territory to cover. But over the last 17 years, I have nearly 5,000 posts to the blog. I've had a few dark periods where I didn't do much posting during that time, but I've recently started posting again, and I have quite a stack of information to catch up on. And since I've started, I've already had a couple of folk send me pictures of new items that their lodges have issued or older items that, aren't that well documented. So it's still staggering along these 17-plus years later.
Well, Bill, let's kind of stay back in that time period, 2004, where this whole website came about. That was pre-Facebook. For those of you who don't know, Facebook really didn't open to the masses until I believe it was like September of 2005, or I could be wrong, maybe it was 2006. So back in those days, we're talking maybe Yahoo groups where something going on in the hobby. Can you kind of, I know it's been 17 years, can you kind of just elaborate a little bit more about that time period and kind of what was the state of the World Wide Web for the hobby that you can remember back in those days?
Yeah, well, back then I actually started on Blogspot, which was a free site. You didn't have to pay any hosting fees. WordPress seemed to be the software package of the day for blogging, and I got started on that with a free image hosting site, Blogspot, which had a limited capacity for file sizes and the amount of data you could have on it, at least on the free platform. After about the first year or so, maybe a little bit longer, I migrated. I decided I'd spend the money on my own domain hosting, which relieved the limits, because I used to only post thumbnail images on the platform, so I wouldn't, use up all the available space too quickly. And shortly after I started, as I recall, John Pennell added a blog section to OA Images, which he kept up for several years until he fell away from that. But there were a couple of other smaller blog sites that had sprung up in those early years. I think Black Eagle Trader was one, and a couple of others, Scouting in the Hills, and a few other efforts. I had hoped it would catch on, if you will, that more and more states or Blue Book editors would, look to publish that sort of thing and make a more vibrant collecting community, sharing information. Although I think the Facebook groups probably do that to a big extent today, and I don't think blogging is what it was all these years ago. But I still find it a good platform for me. You don't need a large knowledge of HTML or software manipulation. A lot of it's WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, and it's allowed me to continue posting. Gaining and sharing information. To people who collect New York OA. And additionally, I started up a second site nowhere near the volume of the New York OA Trader. I started the 10 Mile River Trader because I also collect 10 Mile River Scout Camp issues, which go back into the late 20s, through today.
It's interesting, Bill, when I think back to that time period, there were a few Blue Book editors I can think of that kind of took their work and maybe turned it into, I'm thinking, for example, John Sneed in Louisiana wrote a really nice book on the history of memorabilia, OA memorabilia in Louisiana, but I can't really think of many other Blue Book editors that really took their information online. Can you think of any?
I can't at the moment. I thought a book was too static, and the Blue Book was coming out every couple of years. But this would allow something a little bit more organic and a little bit more timely, particularly when there was a NOAC or a Jamboree and there would be an upsurge in issues. It would allow me to find out what actually existed in the various lodges in New York, and hopefully, at least I would know what the pool was that I needed to fish in.
And the irony there, Bill, is that not long after you founded your site in 2004, the Blue Book issued its last publication, if I don't recall, maybe 2006. Is that right?
Yeah, I think 2006 was the last one. And so I continued on with my site, so I could maintain my list. And, there was no other source, John Pennell's site aside, OA Images aside. There was no regularly updated collecting guide, whether it be nationwide or, New York specific. So, I continued to maintain my list, and I didn't look at it too closely before this call, but I probably have in the neighborhood of 1,800 or 2,000 items on it, subsequent to, I guess it was Blue Book 6 was the last edition, and, a handful of those are corrections to existing listings in the Blue Book, but the balance of those are all items that have come out subsequent to, I guess, January 2006 or so, when the Blue Book went to press for the last time, as it turned out.
Let's touch on this too, Bill, because I think this will help bridge the gap and bring people to the future. My personal opinion is that Facebook groups are great for communication, but they are terrible for archiving pictures and information in the format that your blog does. Would you kind of agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I mean, Facebook, particularly the Scout Patch Traders group with 17,000 members, granted, everybody's not looking at it every day, but information disappears pretty quickly, and the search engine feature, while helpful, doesn't really it isn't the most thorough search engine, I guess, is what I'd say. And a lot of what's posted is trade or sale offers, and not necessarily information. So sometimes to find that bit of information you need is difficult. And while the search engine on my blog isn't probably the best one in the world, with my limited computer skills, I'm still able to categorize, by lodge, and you can do searches, by lodge name, by year, by several the typical search functions, and you may have to wade through a little bit, but it does allow you to see the actual images, and where I have information about quantities issued, or part of the backstory about the particular patch or the issue, which was the trader, which was the limited delegate, what was a limited run patch, why something was listed. I like to know the why, not just the numbers when I can get it, although that's not always possible.
Bill, let me skip ahead to a question that I told you I was going to ask, because I think you've led me right to it. As you may know, my CarolinaOA.com website, that whole project was kind of modeled after your concept. My idea, which didn't work very well, was to basically recruit an editor for each lodge and get them to feed me monthly bits of information from their lodge, whereas you have kind of done it as a one-person show, although be it with lots of help. But my point being that I also fully believe that what we need to preserve is the story behind the memorabilia. So, for example, just to give you a small one, I was on a Zoom call last night, that one that John Pleasance and Larry Lane put together, the Digital Cracker Barrel, and people were sharing some stories. Hank Birdsong from Solly Lodge in Asheville, North Carolina, was sharing the story on a couple of OA flaps, and he told the story of how these flaps were sold literally on the bus as the lodge contingent was going to conclave, and how, essentially they were so dispersed that nobody really got very many duplicates of it, and now it's a really hard patch to get. But I love that kind of stuff. I want to hear the story of, it was sold, after 10 o'clock on a Sunday, and everybody's gone home, and that's why they're so hard to find. So, tell me about any stories you can think of that you've been able to capture on the site that you think are just kind of golden like that. Yeah, well, I had one contributor, I guess, for want of a better term, although he would mainly send me emails and I would craft it into, the individual posts. But Ray Gould was an old Area 2G collector who I knew from some of the upstate New York, Syracuse traderies, or particularly Syracuse traderies, but some of the other ones in central New York. And he sent me a series of emails on the hardest OA items to collect in the lodges in his old area. And, that was pretty interesting. You know which ones tend to be harder to find, but to him, these were the holy grail items from each of those lodges, and that was interesting information to get. That's the one that sticks out, or the group that sticks out most in my mind. I don't have a particular story that I can think of offhand, although there may be a few on the site over the years. So, Bill, you've got really so much to cover here, an entire state, which obviously New York is one of the most populated states. There's a lot of lodges, a lot of councils. How do you kind of decide what the focus of the website's going to be, and also how do you draw inspiration for new posts and fresh content? Well, the primary focus is on, New York Order of the Arrow. So what each lodge produces, as well as the handful of sections that contain New York lodges, is my primary focus. I'll also dip my toe a little bit further afield. People are interested in new lodges, first flaps. So when I find information on that, I tend to post it. I'll, occasionally dip my toe into, New York red and whites, my council CSPs. I don't really collect either, but, I do know that there are people who cross-trade across, OA and CSP and camp and other type issues. I also like to look at
the eBay sale results and find out some, trends on, some of the higher value first flap, say, from New York. Is a Loon Lodge first flap still selling for what it did 5 or 10 years ago, or have, the values gone down or gone up, as the case may be. So I get a little further afield from time to time, but the meat and potatoes is, the new issues and undiscovered or unlisted older items, from the lodges themselves and the conclave issues. I added sometime over the last 17 years.
Well, we've kind of mentioned this already, Bill, but back in 2004 when you started this blog site, you kind of felt like, why wouldn't other people just naturally create their own state-specific sites or niche-specific sites? And so I wanted to ask you, that opportunity still exists today in 2021. We have what I would call a very, very fragmented hobby in that OA Images has kind of fallen off. We won't even get into that. There's some of the other websites people built, Camp Images, someone just was complaining about the other day on Facebook. So, but, all of this is still a possibility for people to go out and create. So what's your sort of opinion on this? Any websites or trends that you think people should head towards in 2021 for the hobby?
Well, it's probably, as you found out with, your blog site, it's one thing to ask for help and ask for contributors, but they seem to be not too many people looking to set up. So anybody looking to start something like this should pretty much look at it as I think, unfortunately, and to some extent, as a one-man show. You have people you trade with or friends in other lodges who will probably likely feed you information, but sending you pre-formatted, fully written posts, at least for me, has been a tough thing to find. A lot of these platforms also allow you to schedule, similar to eBay sales. You can post something on eBay immediately or schedule them to launch at a specific time. And what I tend to do is I'll write a handful of posts, in one sitting, and then schedule them to launch, one per day or every other day over the course of the following week or two. And that allows people to know that your site has new content, that it's not stale. So when they go back to it, there's something new for them to read. I also offer a link where you can sign up to receive a daily, a feed as often as I'm producing new material, that you'll be notified via email of the post, and then you can come back and look. So, it's the ability to reach people, for them to see fresh content, and hopefully, a decent enough search engine that allows people to look back on what you've written on, the particular topic or lodge or year or whatever it might be that most interests them. The scouting joke, it's just an hour a week. It probably is a little more than that to maintain the site, but it's honestly not a difficult thing. Scanning or taking pictures and then editing them down to size and writing up the post isn't, an extremely long thing. And probably for 2 or 3 hours a week, you can keep up, a handful of posts written every week and post it to the site. I do get some comments, not a lot, not hundreds or dozens. I see people reading the site through some of the stat features, but I get rare comments, although sometimes it'll be on a post from, a decade ago that someone has discovered and comments on. And like you say, Facebook, it's a little tougher to see old material, and that's one nice thing about this platform. And I think people can use it as a venue. I used to, or I have over the years, posted the Lodge Conclave, the Lodge Traderie, that I'm that I've been the advisor for. I usually post that on my site. I have a page normally dedicated to that. I created a grid that has all of the section conclaves with New York State lodges, with links to the individual posts. So if someone wants to know the NE3A conclave in 1997, what was issued for the event, they'll be able to go to the grid, click on the link, and find what at least I know was issued for that event. And that's probably the area where I've gotten the most comments on, where people will say, oh, there was a staff issue, or, oh, here's the mug or the program cover, it provides a platform for people to show off what they have as well.
Bill, I think what you just described shows why a website is a good format for this. It's dynamic, and so you can add things as opposed to publishing a book or something which is kind of set in stone, and if you missed something or didn't know about an issue, then it sort of becomes a loss. But let's go back to something we talked about earlier at the beginning, which is that you've been spending a lot of time working with the 10 Mile River Scout Museum. Can you kind of tell us about that effort on your part?
Sure. Probably, it's actually a little bit older than my blog. I think the museum's open for about 22 years now, and I've been one of the trustees since the founding. We started out in a small section of one of the buildings in the headquarters area, displaying some old 10 Mile River memorabilia. Over the years, we got our own building, put a couple of additions on it, moved a couple of buildings from closed camps at 10 Mile River into what I'll loosely term the museum compound, and, have continued to preserve the history and the memorabilia of 10 Mile River there. A small portion of my collection is typically on display there, or has been on display there over the years, different items, but there's a wealth of displays and information. It's certainly not a one-man show. I'm about one of 30 or so trustees. Gene Berman was the chairman of the museum for a good part of its tenure, and for the last 5 or 6 years or so, Michael Drillinger has been the chairman and driving force of the museum. We also have a presence on the web, tmrmuseum.org, where staff photos and memorabilia and newsletters from the various camps and lodges that we've either acquired or been able to get an electronic copy of are posted in the archives. Back in 2001, we printed a 10 Mile River Scout Camp memorabilia guide, and actually we're in the process of looking to update that, and for all the items in the last 20 years or so, since the first edition was published, and all the discoveries of items that hadn't been cataloged or didn't make, for whatever reason, the previous version, and we hope to have that out in time for this year's summer camp. So I've been working on that, and now I'm about a 20-minute drive from the museum since I retired from work, so I may get over there a little bit more this season.
That's great. I really hope to make it up there one day, and maybe you can give me a little tour of the compound. I'd love to see it.
Oh, certainly. The blockhouse, one of the camp trading posts, one of the old 8-boy cabins that provisional scouts, when there were 100-boy camps camped in. We've moved examples of those to the museum area. The blockhouse from one of the closed camps moved a stained glass window from one of the chapels, which is now on display in the museum. And some of the history of the local area gets included, or areas that were off the scout reservation but were frequented by scouts and their families in the area. We have items and displays from those. I know they're working on a display on New York geology in the area of TMR. New York State did some geological surveys in the area, including camp, and they're looking to try and put together a display of that. So it's not just Scout memorabilia. There's also some colonial-era items that were found on the reservation by various either people with metal detectors or amateur archaeologists digging in sites where there were some colonial-era buildings and mills set up. So, yeah, there's some interesting things there. If you ever get to the area, I'd be happy to give you a tour.
Well, to wrap things up, let's just kind of see where you are in 2021. I know when we talked earlier, you were talking about wanting to update the site and kind of build things out a little bit more. Obviously, now you said you're retired. Maybe there's more time to play with your pet projects. What are your plans for going forward, Bill?
Yeah, well, on my New York OA Trader site, I need to clear the backlog, if you will. I haven't posted very much in the last 18 months or so I need to catch up everything from probably later 2019 and 2020 that didn't get posted on the site. And then, the new issues going forward. I see the 2022 NOAC, has been announced tentatively, at least at University of Tennessee in Knoxville. So I'm sure before all that long, we'll start seeing 2022 fundraiser issues coming out. I'm also working on my 10 Mile River Trader site as well, trying to catch up on some postings and display some more vintage items on the site. I also put pre-1960 New York State camp issues from other councils, which I dabble in a bit here and there. Don't do current items from them, but pre-1960, which wasn't quite as far back when I started posting them, but has gotten a little older as time has gone by. But yeah, mainly looking to catch up to where I was, and then probably take a look around and see if there's an additional field that I need to cover or delve into a little bit more than I had in the past. But now I'm in the cleaning off the desktop with all the on-posted items probably over the next several months.
Well, Bill, let me just kind of wrap things up by saying that I think it's so valuable in this type of a hobby, which is collecting memorabilia, for people to share the knowledge. You've done this in your website, I think, to people like Terry Grove, who recently passed this past year, who shared knowledge of Eagle medals. Randy Holden, just thinking of another person who recently passed, who spent so much time with the New Jersey Museum. I just think that is what's going to keep our hobby going in the next generation and the generation after that, if we put these stories out there. So your website, that New York State OA blog, is just such an important, kind of a shining model for what people can do, although it's a lot of work and it's not for everybody. But I'm really excited to just help get the word out. If people have not visited the site, want to point them in that direction. Can you maybe share some of the links to, and like your email, how you would want people to reach out to you? Sure.
Well, there's my email is on the site. If you're visiting the site, you can leave a comment or send me an email. I have a New York OA Trader or NYOA Trader at nyoatrader.com email that will reach me. If you have something you feel should be posted, an old item from your lodge or a conclave item that isn't reflected. Historically, I've also added images of items that weren't otherwise pictured on OA Images, or I guess OA Insignia now, or Patchfault for that matter. Happy to post those. And if anyone's got a good patch story on a New York item they want to share, I'd be happy to receive the information.
That's great, Bill. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and also appreciate you being a member of the Scouting Hot Finds Insiders, my Patreon group.
Good talking to you, Jason. Happy to do it.
All right. Well, that wraps up my interview with Bill Mulrenin, the New York State OA Trader. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but if you want to visit his website, it's at nyoatrader.com. You can definitely check out the show notes, and I'll have a link for it as well. So when I started up my Scouting Hot Finds Insider Patreon group, Bill Mulrenin was the very first person to subscribe. But really, it shouldn't surprise me, because when I go back to his site, I can see that he has been online for a long time now. In fact, in my own patch blanket bulletin board that I used to have back in the 2000s, I've been going through kind of cleaning up those posts that were ported over to my main website now, scoutpatchcollectors.com. And sure enough, there's Bill Mulrenin posting on that forum all the way back maybe 15 years ago. I've actually already done another interview. I won't give this one away just yet, but there's another example I could give you of Bill Mulrenin sharing stuff on the internet that really helped save the episodes of Cloth Talk. My interview with Chris Brightwell, you'll hear more about that in the next episode of Scouting Hot Finds Radio. So Bill has been a great supporter. He's been someone who's really done it right online, and I appreciate him. He's actually going to be with me again really soon. We're going to do an episode of my Scouting Hot Finds Insider Roundtable, and that's going to focus on the OA Blue Book, of which he was the New York State editor. So look out for that. You can find that content at scoutpatchcollectors.com, along with an archive, of course, of this podcast as well. Thanks very much for listening. Jason Spangler, the Santee Swapper.